So hi everybody, we continue talking about chapter 5, and in this video we are talking about a variety of the demand curves. So remember, we're talking about elasticity. Elasticity is how change in one variable is going to affect our other variable. So particularly we're talking about how the change in price of the product is going to affect our quantity demanded. So, and the different variety of the demand curves, there are 5 of them that we're talking about in this video. The very first one is going to be elastic demand, and we already talked about this a little bit. What does this elastic demand means? We're just going to put it kind of all together. So when we're talking about elastic demand, it means that elasticity, the price elasticity of elastic demand is going to be greater than 1. So remember guys, when we put in that formula, price elasticity of the demand curve, this percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. So when you put into this formula your percentage changes and you get some kind of number, if this number is greater than 1, it means we're talking about elastic demand. So if we're talking about elastic demand, it means that quantity demanded for elastic demand proportionally moves more than the price, moves more than the price. So percentage change in quantity demanded is going to be higher than percentage change in price. Guys, I really hope that you have like a piece of paper and a pencil and writing down with me. And we already talked about that for elastic demand, consumers' sensitivity to a price change is high. Again, remember we said that for elastic demand, quantity demanded proportionally moves more than the price. It means the percentage change in quantity demanded is high. You change price only by a little bit, quantity demanded is going to change by a lot. So customers are very sensitive to a price change. And another thing that we need to know about this, the demand curve for elastic demand is relatively flat. So, and this is very important to know. So let's suppose I'm going to have a demand for a certain product over here, and I'm going to show you how it works on the graph. So I'm going to draw my demand that is relatively flat. So let's suppose I am picking a certain point on my graph. Okay, so this is going to be price 1. So just pick a certain price on your graph, and at this price I'm going to go and meet with my demand curve. It's actually, I draw it a little bit. Let me correct this, my graph over here. So that's going to be my quantity line, and I extend my demand a little bit. So we meet, let's suppose, somewhere over here. So therefore over here I will have quantity 1, and then just pick another point, just change your price, whatever point you're going to choose. Let's suppose, let me see if I can do different color. I'm going to say that price of the product has increased. So at this price point, I'm going to go and meet with my demand curve. I met with my demand curve, and I'm going to show you that quantity over here, so this is price 2, quantity 2 is going to correspond to this kind of level. Do you see guys the difference in proportion change? We increase price only by a little bit. Do you see how quantity demanded decreased by a lot? So this is going to be elastic demand. This is you know what, we're very sensitive to a price change. You increase the price of that product, we're not going to buy it. And remember, you need to think about your determinants over here. What kind of goods are going to correspond to this model? Remember, it's some kind of goods that are going to be luxury goods, isn't it? So luxury goods, so goods they have a lot of close substitutes available. So a lot of close substitutes. Okay, then remember, this is going to be our long run. So in the long run, we're more sensitive to a price change. And remember, another broad market versus narrow market. So narrow market is going to be in this category as well. So you increase the price of once again chocolate chip mint Oreo cookie, okay, then the price, then the quantity demanded is going to decrease by a lot because it's a very narrow category. So this is elastic demand. You need to know these measures for the test. You need to know for the elastic demand, price elasticity is greater than 1. You need to know that quantity demanded proportionally moves more than the price. So percentage change in quantity demanded is much greater than in price. Consumers are sensitive to a price change, and you do need to know that demand curve is relatively flat. So those questions will pop up on the test. Moving to the next one. So next one is inelastic demand. If we're talking about inelastic demand, price elasticity is going to be less than 1. Once again, if we put in our formula percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price, then this number is going to be less than 1. So the next thing, we're talking about quantity demanded. So quantity demanded proportionally moves less than price. Customers are not sensitive or less, relatively less sensitive to price change, and demand curve is relatively steep. It's going to be for inelastic demand. So let's draw a graph and see how it works. Let's suppose we have demand for a certain product. Remember, price quantity. I'm going to draw this line relatively steep. So now let's pick a price. Let's suppose this is going to be price 1. At the price 1 level, I actually draw it very steep. It's going to be our quantity 1. And then let's suppose I'm increasing my price level. Just pick any point, pick any other point on your graph. So price of the product has increased. I'm going to go and meet with my demand curve, and quantity demanded, I make it actually very inelastic. Quantity 2 is going to be over here. Do you guys see the difference, the proportion change in price and the quantity? So proportionally, quantity demanded moved only by a little bit versus price. Here you go. This is the product where we price increased by a lot. People are going to say, you know what, I'm still going to buy this product. Quantity demanded decreased, but only by a little bit. Remember, what kind of products that can be? Opposite of what we talked in the previous one. It's going to be some kind of necessity, good that is a necessity. It's going to be, broad market. It's going to be our short run and stuff like that. So therefore, for this one, you need to know that curve is going to be relatively steep. And once again, guys, if you understand how to read the graph and how to draw all the curves, you can tell tons of information from the graph. If you forgot what is inelastic demand, you know that inelastic demand is a relatively steep line. Okay, just draw a demand, take a price, look at the quantity, change the price, okay, meet with your demand curve, then indicate your second quantity. Well, how did the quantity change? Oh, quantity change only by a little bit. So another thing that I want you to emphasize over here, and I didn't do it in the previous one, so just let's look at this formula. Price elasticity, once again, it's percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. So just think about it. Our quantity demanded change only by a little bit. So this one in this formula, it's going to be some kind of relatively small number. But percentage change in price was a pretty good percentage. So percentage change in price was some kind of big number. So you have a small number divided by a big number, you're going to have it less than 1. All the time the answer is going to be less than 1. So this is kind of all connected together. And one more thing that I want you to help to to remember. So I think Menkyu suggested in the book as well how to remember better for elastic and inelastic demand, the steepness of the slope. Do you see how, remember, elastic was relatively flat. So with this relatively flat, we can draw letter E for elastic. So letter E for elastic, okay, it means, once again, this curve is relatively flat. And then for inelastic, remember, it's steep, relatively steep. So inelastic, this is letter I. So inelastic starts with letter I. We draw I with a steep curve. And elastic starts with letter E. We draw the curve that is relatively flat. So we're moving on to a new demand curve, and it's going to be perfectly inelastic demand, guys. And perfectly inelastic demand, it kind of falls into almost a kind of like unrealistic category, but price elasticity for perfectly inelastic demand is going to be equal to 0, and therefore quantity demanded does not change when price changes. And remember, price sensitivity is none in this situation. Price sensitivity is none because quantity demanded does not change. It stays the same. There's no percentage change in quantity demanded. And our demand curve is going to be a vertical line. Let's see how it works on the graph. So if I'm going to draw over here demand curve, and demand curve is perfectly vertical line. So this is my demand curve. Let's suppose I'm picking price, certain price level. I pick a certain price level, price 1. I'm going and meeting with my demand curve. This is going to be my quantity 1 demanded. And then we're going to increase the price of the product. The price of the product has changed, price 2. If I'm going to go and meet with my demand curve, what happened with the quantity demanded? It stayed the same. Customers are saying, you know what? I'm still going to buy this product. Guys, remember, it's sort of like an unrealistic example. An example over here is going to be insulin. Remember, we already talked about that insulin is so detrimental to your life that if the price of insulin is increasing, you're saying, you know what, I'm going to have to do adjustment in my income somewhere else, but I need to buy this medicine for me, because without this medicine, I'm not going to survive. Guys, and in reality, if you take the demand for insulin, it's going to have just a little bit of incline. So the demand for insulin, will have just kind of like a little incline, but that percentage change in quantity demand that is going to be so small that it's not even worth putting it as inelastic demand. They say, well, this is a great example as the perfectly inelastic demand. So quantity demanded does not change when price of the product is changing. And again, guys, remember, if we're going to use this formula, price elasticity equals percentage change. So this is percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. Then if quantity demanded doesn't change, remember, this number is 0. If you take 0, divide by any number, what are you going to get? You're going to get 0. So therefore, your price elasticity is equal to 0. Keep going. Next one is perfectly elastic demand. Again, it kind of a little bit like like unrealistic or extreme case example. And price elasticity of perfectly elastic demand is going to be equal to infinity. And when price elasticity of the demand curve is equal to infinity, it means that consumers buy nothing when price change. So consumers buy nothing when price changes. And once again, it's a kind of like, sort of unrealistic example, but the good example of this, usually economists say that stock market, okay, stocks and agricultural products. agricultural products are going to be in this category. And why it is so? Because there are so many stocks out there, and there's so many, you know, different kind of varieties of agricultural products that, you know, quantity, when the price is changing, quantity kind of infinitely react to a price change. You see what I'm saying? So once again, a little bit unrealistic example. So demand curve for this one, demand curve is horizontal. So once again, make sure that you understand this for the test, and let's draw our horizontal demand curve and see how it works. So we have price and quantity. That's our horizontal demand curve. So let's suppose that initially price was somewhere over here. So, oh, actually, and yeah, I should have said over here, do you remember the quantity? I didn't say anything about the quantity. Quantity is hard to determine. Quantity is hard to determine. So just think of when the price level is 1 and our demand is horizontal, what is our quantity? Is quantity going to be quantity 1, or quantity is going to be quantity 2, or quantity actually can be very, very close to infinity, isn't it? So because there's so many of these stocks out there that, you know, quantity is close to infinity. And now when we're going to change the price, let's suppose price increased. What are we buying? Can we meet with our demand curve? No, we can't. It's impossible to meet with our demand curve, so therefore consumers buy nothing, and therefore since the quantity was close to infinity, okay, the percentage change in quantity demanded is going to be close to infinity as well. So if we have something that is close to infinity, divide by a relatively small number, percentage change in price, then what are we going to have? We're going to get that infinite number. Anyway, if you don't understand that, don't kind of like, you know, concentrate on that. Make sure that you know price elasticity of the demand curve is you know, close to infinity. Consumers buy nothing when price is changing. You need to know that for perfectly elastic demand, our demand curve is perfectly horizontal line. And the very last one is unit elastic. So for unit elastic, we know that quantity demanded and price changes in the same proportion. So, and therefore, if they change it in the same proportion, price elasticity of the demand curve is going to be exactly equal to 1. And we already have that example before. Remember when we introduced the midpoint method in calculating elasticity? And really, what do we know for price elasticity of the demand curve? That how do you think demand curve is going to behave on this graph? So demand curve is going to be exactly like a kind of perfect 45-degree angle. So if the, let me see if I'm going to manage. So if the price 1 here, quantity 1, and then let's suppose I lower the price 2, I'm going to have the proportion. Yes, do you see that quantity? So the change between price and the change between quantity, they're very, very equal. So they're changing in the same proportion. Therefore, price elasticity of the demand curve is going to be equal to 1. So you have percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. Let's suppose it's going to be 50% and 50%, so it's the same proportion change. Therefore, your unit elastic demand is all the time going to be equal to 0. Okay, guys, that's all about the variety of the demand curves. I hope you learned something, and we will move on to the next video.